It's a privilege for me to serve as president of FISA. I believe I've been doing that for about maybe 3 or 4 years now. FISA is a very interesting organization. It's a federation of associations. It's a very unique organization where there's 5 associations. There were 4 founding associations. 1 has been added since. And each association selects board members to sit on the board. And regardless of the size of the associations, the Catholic independent schools are the largest group within FISA, but they don't have more seats on our board. So it's not a proportional representation. And consequently, I think it's a key to our success. FISA is as diverse an organization as you could possibly imagine. We have schools with different educational philosophies, different faith backgrounds, different organizational structures, but yet we function with a very high degree of unity of purpose, because our purpose is to advocate to the Ministry of Education for choice in education and for equitable funding. And FISA is able to stay very unified because we're on point. We're on our key purpose. So it's a real privilege to serve as the president of FISA. It is at times, certainly the last month, it has felt like a part-time job on the side of a full-time job. But it's a great privilege to serve in this capacity, and commendations to Kent and Gabe and the others who represent you around the FISA board table as an AMS society. They represent you very, very well there. So I'm going to launch into a presentation on leadership. I work at the Society of Christian Schools in British Columbia. I'm the executive director. That's a group of about 40 Christian schools across the province, serving about 15,000 students. And I've been very busy helping our leaders navigate this. And when I found out that the AMS group was meeting as well, just brainstormed with Kent and Janet, and we thought a presentation on leadership might be helpful for this group as well. So let me share my screen, and I'm just going to move this around a little bit. There we go. So thanks very much for joining us this afternoon. I think we're in the midst of what I would call the biggest pivot any of us have experienced, the biggest shift. If you were using the term pivot in, I'm a former basketball player, and when you pivot, you shift around to get away from something you don't like and to open up a new possibility. And I think it's an apt metaphor for what we're doing right now. We're pivoting, and it is a significant pivot. This afternoon, I'm going to try to fly at 1,000 feet above the landscape. I don't want to be flying so high that I'm out of touch, nor do I want to be sitting in your office telling you how to micromanage. So I hope what I talk about here today will be at about the right level, at about 1,000 feet. Before I do launch into my presentation, I do want to say thanks to the Ministry of Education. They have been extremely consultative with independent schools. I would say there's no place in North America. I serve on a North American board. I serve on a Canadian education board. Nowhere in North America do independent schools have a better relationship with government than we do here in British Columbia. And I celebrate that. And I give government their kudos every chance I get. They've been remarkably good to work with. I also want to thank the FISA staff. They have been going very, very hard out. So Sean, Janet, Marina, and Magda, thank you to the 4 of you, because I know you've been putting in many, many long hours. I see the time stamp on the emails that come through, and it's ridiculous, actually. So thanks to all of you. I think this slide deck has been sent to you earlier, so you've got it in front of you, so you don't have to furiously take notes. You can add a few thoughts, and I believe this presentation is also being recorded. So I use the term leadership continuity. When we met with the Ministry of Education, we talked initially a fair bit about what we called learning continuity. That was the term, as we shift, learning continuity. So at SCSBC, we've broadened that to say we have to be concerned about learning continuity, leadership continuity, and business continuity. And so we really have different people in my office at SCSBC are helping our schools around those 3 key pillars. So today we want to focus on leadership continuity. I want to start with self-care. you can only lead effectively if you are healthy and well. And this has been a strange time where people are calling us and connecting with us at all kinds of hours. Many of us are spending a lot of time in front of computer screens. Someone said to me this morning, she's tired of a two-dimensional world because we just have lived in this kind of two-dimensional world. So you need a healthy heart, a healthy mind, and the only way you can do that is to watch your self-care. That's the only way you can lead well. Self-care starts, I think, with eating well, sleeping lots, exercising regularly, finding ways, I think, for emotional process and release, whatever that looks like for you, and whoever you're living with right now, who's in your household, or if you're living alone, if you're a single person, you live alone. How do you process your emotions and just find release for that? I think if we don't do that, they really build up. And I think it's critical for all of us to find ways to nurture our soul during this pandemic. Otherwise, we're going to be empty in a very fundamental way, and we won't be able to lead well. So my first encouragement to you is to exercise a high degree of self-care. Next, I want to focus on leaders. We're in a situation that we didn't actually create. We're powerless really to stop it or change it. I love this quote from Tolkien that really says, we may not have chosen this, but we are leading in this time. And now what we have to do is decide what we do with it. And I think what we need to do as leaders is we need to, as Max Dupree said, Max Dupree is a leadership guru. He says leaders define reality and say thank you. He says those are the two most important things we do. We are in a new reality for people, and I think we have to help them understand what this reality looks like, and maybe help them set some parameters and some boundaries. And we should be saying thank you a lot to the people that we work with, and encouraging them and supporting them in any way we can. Max Dupree and other leadership gurus, Peter Drucker certainly, also highlight that leaders bring clarity and hope. Many people are anxious. I have a daughter who's a teacher. I have a wife who's an educational assistant, and I sense sort of the anxiety at the ground level. My daughter was anxious about what the learning platforms would look like, what the expectations would be. My wife, somewhat anxious about whether her job is secure and what her role will involve. And there's a lot of anxiety in these uncertain times. So we can bring clarity to that for our staff members and for our school communities. And I think we're also called to bring hope into the situation so that our people are working from a place with clear structure, clear boundaries, and also some hope for the future. Because without hope, you can just shrivel up and not function very well. I think while we go through this pandemic and this unique time of leadership, we need to focus on the ethos of our schools. And really, you as the leader set the ethos in your school community. And I encourage you to think about being a voice of calm, hope, potentially faith, depending on your context. I think you need to help people understand the context. What does this reality mean? And how do we find ourselves here? And how do we get through it? And you need to provide meaning in this setting, in this new context. And if you can focus on these elements, I think you will help create an ethos in your virtual school community, which is so different from what many of us experience in our brick and mortar school communities, and so different from what we've been used to for a long time. I encourage you to find resources to help you understand your leadership journey. Where are you finding clarity, hope, and inspiration? What blogs do you read? What magazines? What gurus? Where do you get snippets of wisdom? I'm almost on overload right now because I'm connected into almost too many networks at this point. I get so many articles right now and so many offers of free webinars for how to lead in these times that it's almost overload. But I think it is important for all of us to have some. A leadership journal, a blog that we follow, a writer that we find inspiring who can help us put things in context and just give us, bring clarity to us so we can in turn bring clarity to the people that we work with. We're in the midst of setting new rhythms for community or spiritual leadership with our staff, students, and parents. And we need to think intentionally about what that looks like. I think many of our schools, independent schools in a brick and mortar setting, are highly valued for their sense of community. I think it's one of the areas in which we really shine historically, and why parents are willing to pay the kinds of fees that they do to be part of our communities. And we need to think intentionally about what that looks like. What does it mean for our staff to be a community right now? How about our students? I know some principals in my schools are doing a morning greeting, a morning devotion, a morning opening every day with their whole school, and it's recorded so that students can watch it together at any point in the day. And it just brings some context and brings some glue to hold the community together. So I encourage you to think specifically about that. Leadership continuity involves, I think, a high orientation on mission focus. Your school is distinctive, and you champion that distinctiveness. And parents are there because of that distinctiveness. They've chosen to be part of your school community, whether it's a particular educational focus or a particular faith focus or a community focus. Parents are there because you are distinct. So now we have to keep the main thing, even though we're working in a totally different context and a totally different environment. Otherwise, parents will lose the sense of this school has a distinct offering that drew me here. So focus and refocus your community on how you are meeting your mission. Stay mission focused. Encourage your teachers to stay mission focused. Manage your messaging around your mission and your vision and your distinctiveness. That's why parents came to you, and that's why they'll stay with you. But it's up to you to champion your distinctiveness in this new context in which we find ourselves. As I've said, parents were attracted to your school because of your mission, and a strong mission focus will allow you to keep them, and they'll stay with you once we're through this pandemic in whatever our return to normal looks like. And that could be a whole other webinar, actually. What does normal look like? Communication is really critical at this time. And I'm encouraging leaders, and the people I follow are encouraging a strong emphasis on communication. Communicate, communicate, communicate. As a leader, you certainly need to communicate with your staff and your parents and your board members. Those would be the three main focuses, I think, of your communication. I would encourage you to set a communication schedule and stick to it. If you're going to put out a bulletin a week or a parent notice a week, stick to that so that parents know when it's coming, they know what to expect. Don't flood them with 15 communications. Save them, bundle them, and then stick with your communication schedule. Communicate information, but also communicate mission. So this is your chance in your messaging to parents. Here's again where you can communicate and champion and celebrate your distinctiveness. As you're now into rolling out your learning platforms, as the vast majority of independent schools are up and running, you can begin to share anecdotes about what's happening in various classrooms, and you can celebrate and champion your mission. So don't just communicate information. People are going to get the sense of, why are we here? Why are we paying tuition? We could be at any school down the street, but you want them to know why they're there and feel like they're getting great value for their tuition dollars. I think as we walk through this journey, we need a sharp focus on what I call executive leadership. Most independent school principals come from the world of education. We're pretty good at relating to people. We're pretty good at communicating. but we don't necessarily have a lot of executive function training, budgets, strategic planning, these kinds of things. But I think right now we need to heighten our focus on executive leadership. You need to sustain your educational program. You are probably, if you're like most independent schools in the province, looking at ways to trim costs, and you're managing a new fiscal reality. What about those families that have been laid off and can't pay tuition? What kind of provision are you making? What kind of impact will that happen? Where in your budget can you realistically say, you know what, we can save some money here in the next weeks or months if this goes on? And this is an executive capacity that's really, really critical right now. You need to start looking ahead to next year as well. I'll talk a little bit more about that. I know this shift has taken all of our time and attention right now. But it's not too early, I would contend, for us to begin to look ahead. And that's a strategic kind of a capacity that executive leaders have. I'm assuming many of your schools are operated by boards, and we need to make sure that our governance stays appropriately focused on what I would call policy and strategic initiatives. Your board is probably going to want to help you right now, and in the time of a crisis, there's a danger that a board can dive down into the operational realm, and it's well-intentioned. They want to help, they want to do what they can, but I really think you want to keep your board focused on the policy and strategic, and show that you and your team are competent to handle the operational considerations. Executive leadership involves managing your message. This comes back to the communication piece. Your messaging to your teachers, and they in turn will take key elements of what you're saying and they will message that to the parents. So you're helping people stay on point, on step with mission appropriate messaging. And you need to be very aware of the messaging that's going out. I'm not sure if all of your schools have donors, but I think many probably do. And you need to think carefully about what it means to manage donor relations during a time of pandemic. We've done a lot of work in the SCSVC. We have large donor bases in most of our schools, and we're doing a lot of work with our schools saying, how do you relate to your donors at this time? If you don't say anything, you risk them alienating them, and if you go to them with an open hand, you might risk treating them like an ATM machine, and both of those are not in the right ballpark. So you want to think carefully about how you connect with your donors and how you relate to them at this time. And in this area, even though I'm talking about executive management skills, I think we're going to only do this well if we can demonstrate an abundance of empathy. You know, we were probably 10 minutes into Minister Fleming's announcement when some independent schools were getting texts from parents saying we're not paying tuition anymore. And it didn't take long, and I think part of the response could have been one of anger and frustration. Those texts were coming from parents who probably have lost their job, don't know where their next paycheck's coming from. There's so much uncertainty, so much anxiety among our parent community right now and our staff community. So as we lead, even though we need a high level of executive leadership, we need an abundance of empathy. The flip side of executive leadership, I would say, is relational leadership. And again, I think independent schools are well known for having highly relational leadership. So I don't want you to lose your focus on relational leadership. I think you need to think carefully about how you're supporting your team. How are you supporting your teachers, your vice principals, your learning support services? If you have an international education department, how are you supporting the folks there? I'm encouraging schools to think about doing regular check-ins with each staff member. It might start off as weekly, and it might go to bi-weekly and monthly the longer this goes. But I do think we need to check in with people and just simply ask the question, how are you doing? And what can we do for you? If you ask those two questions, you'll never go wrong in a conversation with a staff member by listening to how they're doing and then saying, how can I help you? I don't know if any of you watch the TV drama New Amsterdam. About a hospital in New York, and the hospital director is a brilliant, brilliant leader. Probably 10 times every show, he says, how can I help you? And it's a great leadership question. How can I help you? So check in with your staff members, make sure they're okay. Define a staff culture. Again, this comes back to how do you foster and maintain morale and community? At SCSBC, we have a staff member who just started her mat leave this week. So on Wednesday, we had a virtual send-off for her. And we couldn't be with her and give her gifts. So we have 7 or 8 staff members on staff. We each picked a children's book. We ordered them on Amazon, and from now to the middle of May, she's going to get children's books delivered for her new baby. And if you wouldn't believe it, the first book was delivered while we were online having a Zoom tea party in the afternoon. Our admin assistant said, hey, Amber, why don't you go check your mailbox right now? Because she had got a delivery notice. And the first book arrived. So it was a great way for us to celebrate and create a sense of community when we can't be together. What are you going to do for Administrative Assistance Day? It's coming up in a week or so. I think it's this coming Wednesday, actually. We're going to do a staff drive-by and drop off a plant and a gift card at our admin assistant's house just to thank them for the work. So we're trying to create community, and I encourage you to do that. I really encourage you to assess the needs of the marginal and the vulnerable in your school community. Well-adjusted, high-functioning families will probably be able to pivot with you quite well. And it's not that they don't need any contact, but certainly the vulnerable and marginalized families need a lot more of our care. What about those families who have lost income? What about single parents? What about families with marginalized learners? What about medically or emotionally fragile parents? What about homes that have gone through a recent divorce or are on the verge of divorcing, or where there's domestic abuse or alcoholism or whatever the case may be? These families need extra care, extra attention. And then I would say balance the urgency that you feel on the executive decision making with time for discernment. I think many of us initially, when we heard the announcement, the first thought was, how many staff do we have to lay off? And now, 4, 5, 6 weeks later, look at all the support programs that we're aware of where staff can gain support, and maybe our schools can even apply for some of those. So I think you want to balance the executive urgency with time and discernment. Okay? And if you get nothing else out of this presentation this afternoon, I would encourage you to remember this line: be gentle with yourself and generous with others. Be gentle with yourself and generous with others. If you can do that, you will not stray very far, I think, from a strong leadership path. Time is marching. Let me just quickly talk about some strategic, because I think now is the danger is that we get so caught in the tyranny of the urgent that we lose sight of the big picture. If you're not thinking about your school 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 2 years from now, or 5 years from now, no one is. So you and your school board ultimately, I think, need to be looking ahead. It's not too early to start thinking ahead. Andy Crouch is one of the leadership gurus I follow, and he has a podcast right now which basically says, is this pandemic a storm? Is it like a winter blizzard? Is it a season, like a winter season? Or is it a mini ice age? Is it a new epoch? Is it a new time that's going to really, and depending on your answer to that question, it will have a different impact. He argues that our organizational who and why will endure. That will stay the same, and we'll come out of this with a need for our mission to be met. But perhaps how and what we do could change dramatically. So the who and why will likely stay, but what about the how and what? Could that change? I was on a Zoom call this morning where some educators are saying, wonder if we could shift to a 4-day week with 1 day of online learning. And there's all kinds of innovative ideas that people are starting to think about now. Andy Crouch says, if things go back to normal, he says, we know what normal is, so we can easily adjust to that. But we must prepare for the eventuality that normal might look different. And he says, you can't go wrong by at least thinking and starting to make some preparations. You know, now that we're all familiar with Zoom, what does it mean for meetings and travel schedules and online learning? We may never go back to the old normal that we have. So we've made a lot of the immediate adjustments, and it's definitely not too soon to be looking ahead. And I encourage you also to help your board navigate this. At SCSBC, we talk to our boards about being in the crow's nest. If you think of an analogy of a sailing ship, you know, we don't need them to come down from the crow's nest. We have enough hands on deck. We're managing the day-to-day reality of this, but we need a board to stay on the policy development and the strategic thinking, helping think about what does our building project look like now that we have a pandemic? What about our donation campaign that we were running? What does our school look like in 3, 5, 10 years? You want your board in the crow's nest thinking about those kinds of issues for sure. And be honest with your board about your own needs. I hope your board is asking you, how can we help you? And how can we support you? Because that's what I'm preaching to our boards is your main role right now is to support your head of school. But watch out for operational creep, because in their strong desire to help, they might end up sitting in your office right beside you in your principal's chair and becoming a co-principal. And that's not going to be good for you or your school in the long run. I want to thank you for allowing me to share some thoughts and connecting with you. I know it's sort of a quick and a high-level overview, but I hope there's some material there that you will find valuable. And yeah, Kent, I'm certainly happy to come back and join this group if we want to have a follow-up conversation, or if there's any other way I can support AMS now or into the future.
I appreciate that very much, Ed, and also your overview of leadership. I'm sure all of us gained from what you had to say.